Welcome to the world's best podcast. I'm Isaac.
I'm Adam.
And I'm Karen.
Welcome, Karen.
I feel like I just have to introduce myself.
You do.
Yeah, you're at a point now.
You've
been on here long enough.
From cameo to regular on this.
Excellent.
On this podcast.
You have the right to introduce yourself.
My infiltration plan is complete.
Oh, so you're Hydra then? That's what you're telling us.
Basically, hail Hydra.
Oh, good.
Oh gosh, that meme was.
Well, then I'm the white version of Nick Fury from the original comics.
That's right.
Because I'm way too white to be Samuel L. Jackson.
What gathers us all here tonight? What are we going to talk about?
Let's see. Should we narrow it down, or just come right out and say it? We already talked about Captain America, so the next thing on the agenda is X-Men: Days of Future Past.
Yeah. Now, let me preface this conversation by saying that it was our full intention to review all the major films up to this, but this was so good after we watched it that we were like, this must come first.
Yeah, because the other ones, in all fairness, the other ones are commentaries. This is more of a straight-up review.
Yeah, we're just going to do a straight-up review.
So it's a little different, but yeah. And then we'll do the commentary when it comes out on Blu-ray, which is God knows when.
Before we get into the discussion, warning to our listeners, there's going to be a lot of spoilers. There's going to be a lot of things that we're going to be talking about. So if you have not seen the movie, do not
What's wrong with you?
Yeah, first of all,
Go watch it.
Go watch it, you fool. Go and watch it and then enjoy the spoilers as we discuss them. Because this was a time travel related movie, there's a lot of speculation out there as to what they meant. Because when you have 2.5 hours to make a movie, there's only so much explanation that you can give. But for what it was worth, and for the errors that 20th Century Fox has made in the past with previous movies, namely X-Men Origins Wolverine and X-Men First, what is the third one called? Last Stand. Thank you. Those are the major ones. Was there any other ones that were kind of
no, it was those two, basically.
No, those were the pieces of crap.
This movie is basically, I would say,
it's the apology.
It's an apology. It's a flat out apology, and more so than the apology given by what's his name for Batman and Robin, Joel Schumacher.
Oh, that's
at least with that apology, he just apologized. But it wasn't like he did anything about it. He just said sorry, But that wasn't good enough, Joel Schumacher.
It's still not good enough. I still have scars.
Brian Singer felt so bad for leaving and doing that horrible Superman Returns movie.
Can we have a Days of Future Past just for Superman Returns?
And he saw what was done with his story with X-Men First Class, and he's like, I need to go back to making money and good reviews again. So he comes back, and this is based on a comic book in, what was it,
1980...
82? 83?
I have the hardcover actually in front of me.
Oh, snap.
Yeah.
Somebody on this show does research.
I'm trying to remember. It was sometime in the mid to early 80s.
The original story was written by Chris Claremont and illustrated by John Byrne, correct?
Yes.
And in the storyline, the future in that particular instance was in 2013, just a year prior to where we're currently at.
We didn't have any of that crap that was in the movie. Why not?
Now, what we're not going to do is, I'm just giving you the basics of the story in relation to the movie. There's quite a bit of differences, but as far as sticking to the feel of the story, which actually was only 2 issues, wasn't it?
Yes, it's only 2 issues long. It's actually quite condensed. It's a very condensed and very quick story.
Yeah.
But it gets a ton of information across very easily and very, what's the word I'm looking for? Very effectively. Yeah. Very concise, very effective.
So, I mean, basically the story in the comic book is that mutants, or it's in the future, mutants have been rounded up into basically concentration camps and any of their human sympathizers. And in the comic book story, Kitty Pryde has the ability to transport herself, her consciousness, back into time, and she goes back to what we know as the present to prevent Senator Robert Kelly from being assassinated, right?
Mm-hmm.
By who was it?
It was Mystique and the Brotherhood, but
it was Mystique who had taken over the Brotherhood for her own evil purposes.
A minor thing about the story.
Please correct.
Technically, Kitty Pryde doesn't send herself back to her younger self. There is actually a woman who has. Oh my God! Why can't I think of the word? Basically, she ends up being Rachel Summers. And she's the one who sends Kitty's consciousness back to her younger body. They're in the prison camp together, and so they come up with the idea collectively to do this. That's my only correction.
So,
and if you want any more of the story, we recommend that you actually go read it, which is probably what we should have done before this podcast.
And if you can't find it at a comic book shop, go on to the Marvel app.
Well, even so, it's very easy to find. You can, even if you can't find the individual issues, you can at least get the bound trade backs or the trade paperbacks.
Yeah.
So because it comes with more issues than are actually involved with Days of Future Past, but the 2 issues that are involved in the story are in that collection.
So anyway,
good stuff.
That is the basic story: preventing the assassination of Robert Kelly, who. That's a character who we actually saw in X-Men 1 and I guess kind of X-Men 2.
Yeah,
well, now it's kind of X-Men 2, but before it was
kind of.
Technically. The storyline in the movie is similar to that, except for it's a little bit more extreme. Basically, the storyline in this is that Mystique goes to kill Bolivar Trask, who's come up with this Sentinel program because he thinks that mutants are dangerous. And he's been experimenting on mutants, and now I don't think up to this point he had been integrating their powers into the Sentinels, but he had created the Sentinels to identify the mutant gene, the X gene or whatever, and he doesn't get any funding, but then Mystique kills him. And then she gets captured, and then they use her blood and her DNA to learn how to make the Sentinels like adaptable, sort of like Darwin in X-Men First Class.
That's right.
Yes, I was wondering, like, what? Isn't that more like Darwin and less like Mystique? She can just change shape.
Yeah, but they killed Darwin.
Yeah, that's true. They did. That kind of sucked. They always got to kill the black guy.
Yeah.
Anyway, so they use Mystique to create these like Uber Sentinels, and because of the death of Bolivar Trask, it sort of ignites the debate about the dangers of mutants and allows the Sentinels to be built. Well, unfortunately, what happens is that more and more bad people get in charge of the program, and then the Sentinels go into overdrive, basically. They are able to identify potential in human beings that have like latent mutant genes, or their kids might have it. They'll eliminate the parents. So it's a bit more bleak, I think, than the comic book. And the movie basically starts out in the future, which in the movie is, what was it, 20...
In the movie, it's 2016, so it's 2 years to our future, but it's 3 years ahead of where they originally wrote it in the comic.
Okay, I thought for some reason it was like 2025 or 2023 or something like that.
I'm pretty sure it was 2016.
So
the end, which we'll get to later, is
and that's basically where it starts out. And I'm not going to get into a full. I don't want to get into like a full review of the film.
Yeah, no description. Go watch it, like we said.
Yeah, go and watch the film.
If you need any convincing from us, I think the general consensus we can give right now is it's amazing.
Yeah, so
this is not story time with World's Best Podcast. Watch it for yourself, damn it.
We're going to start out with the shortest section of the podcast, which is going to be what we didn't like about it. Which
can I go first because mine is really short?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, here's mine. I don't have any.
You got to have something, dude. You can't. There's flaws with every film. Even the greatest films have flaws.
Yes, every movie has sins according to CinemaSins. But
okay,
no, I mean it has some.
Even if your beefs are minor, what are they?
Okay, then I guess we'll go to Isaac so Adam can
go to you because I can't think. Honestly,
my major beef was that in this film, spoiler alert, I know we'll keep saying it throughout, just so you guys know. maybe someone's decided to skip ahead and they didn't hear spoiler alert.
Yeah, you never know.
You never
Or
know.
they just tune us out.
I'm just thinking worst case scenario here. My biggest beef was that my major beef was that I don't think they did a good enough job explaining what was retconned, what was not. Now, clearly, Last Stand was retconned. Clearly.
Well, definitely. Yeah.
Oh, 100%.
Based on the end. That is
It
obvious.
is gone.
You say that with
Another
such
thing that was
glee.
clearly retconned was probably Wolverine's origins. Because at the end of the film, she isn't taken by
Stryker.
Stryker,
Yeah.
but Mystique. So we have no idea what his actual origins are now. Those have completely changed.
Yeah.
So those two are absolutely retconned. But beyond that, it's fuzzy as to what was, or sorry, the obviously the end, the second half maybe
hmm
of X-Men 2 at a minimum. My theory is that they retconned everything except for First Class because there is no mention of the Sentinels at all in the first two X-Men films. Nothing is mentioned.
Well,
And that was actually one of
Yeah.
my complaints. It was like, well, if you're going to introduce the Sentinel thing, then you got to just get rid of all of the movies, basically, or in some small way.
I roughly understand that, and I mean it makes sense. But I guess at the time, the original X-Men movies weren't looking that far into the future. Again, this was the beginning of the sort of revival of the comic book genre in movies. Like X-Men was pretty much one of the precursors to the modern version of a comic book movie. So they weren't thinking that far and ahead. The idea of pre-planning a trilogy the way that movies are done now was completely unheard of. So they didn't think that far in advance, and I can completely understand that. My commentary on that is just that, okay, I will assume that because they don't mention anything of the Sentinels, I would say maybe 75% of the information that we're given in the first X-Men movie is probably still canon, because Rogue still ends up with the X-Men, probably because of something that happens with Magneto. I would say it's probably just more in the minor details that gets changed, because I think one of the things with time travel movies, and especially where they don't get into that kind of detail, is I sort of assume that the same events sort of play out if it wasn't associated with if it isn't in any way connected to what was changed in the past. So in my head, I sort of assume that anything in the first two X-Men movies that was not related to Stryker or the Sentinel program was still there, is still technically part of the universe. That's just sort of how I'm assuming everything's going, but that's just sort of a personal thing that I do.
Which really, because of the events of this film, it's fair to say that all timelines minus First Class have been altered. So
Yes.
your argument is completely valid and very eloquently put. So thank you for explaining what my frustration was. Like I have no problem with that at all. I just wish they would have maybe.
Yeah, I think if they had explained it a little bit better, it would have gotten a little too,
It would have
exposition
been
dumpy.
yeah. It's tedious with that kind of thing.
I think that at that point it's like, okay, let's sort of leave that up to the audience assumption, at least until we get to Apocalypse, which I'm pretty sure is going to at least iron out some more of those details.
Yeah. And I think the only movie that I've ever seen time travel involved with where they tied it up well was Back to the Future, honestly.
Yeah.
And it's tough to do it. You're right.
Yeah, it's a very tricky thing, and I can completely understand the frustration with that, but at the same time, after seeing it so much in X-Men comics,
Right.
because let's face it, X-Men comics have so many alternate universes and so many different timelines that at some point there is a suspension of disbelief that you just kind of accept.
Yes.
So it's like, you know what? You just kind of figure out what everyone's story is in different timelines, and you sort of just all mesh it up together.
Yeah, I think that the best way to put it is that if you're a comics fan, you're well familiar with retconning and with reboots and with
Bringing characters back from the dead.
Yeah, basically, with reboots and bringing characters back from the dead and retcons and everything, you tend to start viewing those characters or those stories as small part of a much larger tapestry. And if you view it that way, it's a much more enjoyable experience, because then you just kind of ruin it for yourself. You're like, well, that isn't what they did in the previous issues. You know, you can then comics suck, you know, so just kind of embrace the change and, you know, let it be a little bit crazy. And, you know, when you have a comic book that runs for decades, you're going to have a lot of, continuity errors, and you get used to it. I'm saying that more as like a movie fan. Adam, go ahead with what you were going to say.
No, my thing is, who's to say that at some point along the line they don't reveal that, even though it didn't happen in this film, maybe Wolverine somehow gets captured by Stryker anyway.
Yeah, I mean
maybe she takes him to Stryker. Who knows?
We just don't know. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, like my assumption is that Stryker, I think at the end of the movie, I think the experience of being near Bolivar Trask and almost going through the assassination, I think it changes his mind about mutants, because the reason in the previous movies that he's doing what he's doing is because his son Jason was a mutant, and he deeply resents that part of himself being, I think they say that the men are the one who carry the mutant genes, and so I guess he sort of resents the fact that he's the one who caused his son to become this and to basically end up killing his wife. And I think he just has a ton of deep anger towards it. But I think the whole situation that just happened in Days of Future Past, I think that kind of negates his feelings on that, and so now he may even be more of a sympathizer with mutants than an enemy.
Or maybe it'll be somebody else who gives him the
for all we know, like maybe because Wolverine is technically still conscious of what happened, maybe he decides he wants to go through the procedure anyways, just, you know, be like, I just want my bones to be made out of metal.
Yeah, and maybe a more I guess I don't know how to put it, like a more ambivalent good version of Alpha Flight. I mean, the X-Men Wolverine version was like they were a government weapon, which granted that's what they are in the comics, but you know, when you read those, you don't really get the sense that it's something that they're like being forced to do, you know, or anything like that. Maybe Stryker leads a more maybe he's a bit kinder version of himself, like you said, and he still does Alpha Flight, but you know what I mean? Maybe something like that. I don't know. Yeah, there's a lot of open-ended stuff.
Can I talk about the one thing I had an issue with in this movie?
Go for it.
Okay, so I think I've spoken before about there's one scene in this movie that I know got cut out, and it hurts me so much that it was cut out, because I would have loved to have seen it in this movie. And it's the scene where Rogue was supposed to have a more important role. Not hugely important. It was still basically a step up from a cameo, but it was at least relevant to the plot versus what she just kind of gets in the end, which is, you know, we find out that she's with Bobby in the Xavier Institute. But originally she was supposed to take over for Kitty Pryde in sending Wolverine's consciousness back to his younger body, because Kitty gets injured when Wolverine is having one of his, you know, seizures. And so they're realizing that Kitty can't keep doing this. She's getting exhausted. And so there's a scene where Magneto and Bobby go to what is the current Xavier Institute, but it's being used as a prison for mutants, and they break Rogue out of the prison. There's a whole prison break scene that they cut out of the movie. And it kind of pisses me off, because I really kind of wanted that in the movie, especially because Rogue sort of keeps getting the shaft in these movies, and she's my favorite X-Men. She's my favorite female superheroine, and I really wanted to see her with a more substantial role, in a role where she's using her powers. You know, I just kind of wish that was in there, but you know, that's honestly a minor thing, especially because they say they're going to put it on the DVD, so we're going to see it if we want to anyways.
Yeah.
You know, that's really my biggest issue, but it's not that big.
There was one line in it that I rolled my eyes on, and it was when Magneto was saying how he was trying to save JFK because he's, quote, one of us. And I was like, Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that one was.
I didn't care for that line at all. I thought that was a throwaway line and completely unnecessary, and I thought it was stupid.
I would have appreciated it more if Magneto had said something along the lines of, he's one of us in the sense that he's willing to fight for mutants in the same way that he fought for the civil rights movement.
Yes.
Like I would have,
but he didn't end there.
No, he didn't end it like that. He just kept going with it. I'm like, oh dear.
Well, my thing is, what if Magneto was lying? I mean, are we?
He could have been.
Either way, it was a stupid line.
Yeah, that was a really lame line.
The line may have been stupid, but I did like the inclusion of the whole.
Now, let's get away from that. Let's get away from the negative and get into the positive realm.
Yes.
Now, obviously, we loved the film, but what did we love about the film? Adam?
Well, first and foremost, I really love the four of them, the two Xaviers and the two Magnetos.
Mm-hmm.
Having them all in the film was fantastic because, and for me, it was kind of weird because James McAvoy's version of Xavier is at a point where he's lost all hope. Basically, he's at the end of his rope, and he's taking to drinking, and he's doing the drugs to keep his legs going, and
Yes.
all this and stuff. And then conversely, you see Patrick Stewart's older Xavier in the future, who's, if that's the future, that's the shittiest future you could possibly imagine. Like, he's facing certain death, and you could see it in his face, but at the same time, he still has that calming demeanor, that leadership, that hopefulness. You know what I'm saying?
Patrick Stewart doing what he does best.
But
pulling the audience in.
Yeah, no, but what I'm saying is he was still, despite all that, there was still elements of hope within him, and I'm like, okay, this version's gotten a lot worse than this version, in my opinion. So it was odd to see that, like, but they played it very well, the two of them. And what I liked about it was there was that one scene with where the two Xaviers sort of have interaction with each other.
Mm-hmm.
That was seriously that scene, and I'm not just saying this because it's cliche. That scene really did give me chills. That was amazing, and I mean that kind of dialogue, that kind of interplay, I think it was a definite turning point in the film.
Yeah.
But it's also something that you can take, outside of the make-believe and all that stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and apply some of those quotes and some of those ideas, to everyday life. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I really loved that exchange of dialogue. It was very well played, and the acting in that scene was exceptional.
For me, that was the turning point of the film, because at that point I'm like, gosh, young Xavier's a bit of a butthole, he's whining, he's moaning, and you understand, but at the same time, it's just dragging on you, And then he has that exchange with his older self. I was literally in tears watching that. And the thing I realized with this scene is that the thing that I appreciate about movies in general are not so much the overall content of the film, but the moments that it provides that stand out, that kind of pull me in emotionally. Yeah. Which is why, like, as much as I love Dark Knight, there's nothing about it that really pulls me in and makes me sympathize with any of the characters, Whereas X-Men, you're like, yes. And that whole scene, that scene right there, like, every movie has its, like, defining scenes or scene or whatever. Mm-hmm. To me, this was that scene.
Oh, definitely agreed.
Because not only is it one of the most emotional scenes in the movie, I'm not going to say it's the most emotional, because I don't know that, because I got emotional at other parts too, but it defines the difference between the Brotherhood of Mutants and the X-Men, as defined at the beginning of that first X-Men film.
Yeah. When
Charles and Eric walk away from that Senate meeting. And that is one of the first exchanges in the film, is Magneto stating very clearly that they are the problem, they are the problem, not us. And then Charles saying, we have to work together. We have to fight for a common good. They established that at the very beginning of that first X-Men film. And this was such a great parallel to that because it reestablishes why the X-Men are such great characters and why these are my favorite comic book films, because of that fight between good and evil. And not just a fight between good and evil like Lord of the Rings, where it's like, these guys are definitely good and these guys are definitely bad. You can see both sides, but yet that you would ultimately, more than likely, pick the X-Men side. But there's a part of you that says, maybe on a different day I might pick the Brotherhood. I don't know. And that moment for me was just, it defined what these movies and what that relationship is about, and also who Xavier is. And that's what brings them back. He said, you have to continue to hope. And I love that. Yeah. It's just the best.
And the other thing, too, I mean, with the Magnetos, it was kind of odd seeing Ian McKellen's version of the character kind of admit, in a way, not totally and completely, but in a way admit that he was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That is something I honestly never thought I'd see in an X-Men movie.
Yeah.
And the cool thing is, like, he's in the same, he's very weary, he's weary, he's sort of
downtrodden
at a point where he's given up, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But at the same time, even when he's so frail and sort of beaten down looking, he still has that awesome moment at the end where he's like in full display of his power. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
He's like full on powerful Magneto that we're used to. And then when you transition to the future, or sorry, the past. Now I'm getting my timeline all mixed up. When you transition to the past, Fassbender did a perfect, Fassbender was the Magneto we were used to.
Yeah.
Whereas McCallum was a different take on it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. It's, I have to, the interchange of the four actors as the two characters is probably the key aspect of this movie, because I think a lot of people sort of get stuck on an idea of what Charles Xavier is supposed to be and what Magneto is supposed to be.
Yeah.
And I think you just kind of spoke on that, Adam, which is like, we're used to seeing Ian McKellen as this very powerful and almost always in the wrong kind of Magneto and almost never admitting defeat. And now we're seeing him, say, it would have been so much easier had we not been fighting all those years. We could have solved this years ago. I was wrong. And then seeing Fassbender in Magneto's youth as thinking that he's right and so adamant that he's right about what he thinks about the world. And then, but also about Charles Xavier, because I think people sort of look at Xavier sometimes and they think he's very one note, that he just has this optimism that is unrealistic, but when in reality, he does have his pessimism and he does have those moments where he isn't always sure about what's going to happen. And that's perfectly portrayed by McAvoy's version, where he's utterly hopeless about his situation, where he just doesn't want to deal with it anymore. And it portrays these characters as much more well-rounded and much more three-dimensional than I think people realized.
A couple of the other things I really liked was, first of all, Jennifer Lawrence as Mystique was far more comfortable, I think, this time around, the first time around. Transitioning into the Mystique that we've seen before.
The one that it's like, well, I'll take whatever side works best for me.
Exactly.
Yeah, which is exactly the kind of Mystique I expect from the comic book. She'll take whatever side fits her agenda or fits her current priorities, which at that moment, her priorities were getting revenge on Bolivar Trask for doing what they did to her friends, her fellow mutants. That was her only motivation. She wasn't thinking about, the future. She wasn't thinking about the overall ramifications of this. She was just acting on her own instincts and reacting to a situation that she thought was her top priority. Right. And that's really all that Mystique is in the comic book. She acts on her own self-interest.
I also like the fact that Beast got a little bit more to do in this one.
Yeah.
At the same time, though, maybe that's one of my small negatives. At the same time, he did a lot more, and he had a great moment to shine in the Paris sequences. But they allude to his intelligence rather than show it, and that's sort of frustrating. You know what I
Oh,
mean?
you mean it's more like he's expositing how smart he
like
is,
they'll tell you how smart he is,
but they
but
won't
you never actually see it
show
play out.
it? Well,
Like,
I mean,
basically, he was a glorified babysitter for Xavier in this movie. I mean, he did some really cool things. He had awesome moments, but a glorified babysitter nonetheless.
well, I mean, I don't know. I still saw.
There, Isaac, you wanted a negative? There it is.
Oh, thank you. I didn't know it was going to happen.
Yeah.
I don't know. I kind of see what you're saying, but at the same time, think about how many characters they have in this movie.
Yeah, definitely. I totally
I
understand
mean,
that.
I understand the point you're making. It's like, okay, yeah, they're telling us how smart he is versus showing us how smart he is, but
It's just very central to the comic books. You know what I mean?
well,
I mean,
actually, there was one scene where he does display actually a great amount of intelligence, especially with technology, because I
When
think
they
that's
break into the Pentagon.
well, when they break into the Pentagon, but also the scene where he has like all the televisions hooked up and everything, and he's
Yeah, yeah.
listening in for all the information he can
Yeah.
get on the Sentinel program on Boulevard Trask. That's how they know to go to Paris. I'm like, okay, that's actually a pretty good scene in regards to showing us his technological savvy, because I think a lot of people sort of look at Hank McCoy and they're like, oh, how can someone be a genius in so many different scientific fields? And I think we're used to seeing him in sort of a medical respect, but technologically, we need a little bit more proof of that,
Yeah,
because it's like, how can he build an entire jet? Well, here.
Yeah, it would be two time. It would be two
No,
time.
no, I totally
think the
understand
best
it from that
example was from First Class.
Yeah,
Yeah.
No, I totally understand it from that respect. I just think it's such a big component. Like it's so often used and explored in the comic book that a part of me wishes that it would be seen more.
Well, the one issue I usually have with that in the comic book, though, is that they sort of use the genius intellect of some characters as a deus ex machina a lot.
Yeah.
And so it's like, oh, because I just invented this thing that's immediately going to save the day, and I happen to do it, a day before all this happened.
I'll give you that.
Yeah,
you're
That's
right.
usually an issue I have with that.
The other thing I have to do, which I rarely do on this show, and Isaac can attest to that, is I have to admit that I was wrong. Because
Oh.
yeah, and I never do that. So this is the first and probably the only time I'll do it. I came on this show when we first got pictures of Quicksilver, and I said, "It looks like an idiot. Looks stupid. This has the makings of being laughable, or something along those lines." And I pretty much said, Aaron Taylor Johnson pretty much is guaranteed to do a better job at this because it's Joss Whedon.
Well, and especially coming on the coattails of seeing him and
Godzilla.
what's her name in Godzilla, you're like, how is this combo going to be beat?
Yeah, no. So I fully expected, that version to be better portrayed and better acted. And I don't know how those guys are going to do yet. I haven't seen, obviously, Age of Ultron. But man, was I wrong about what is his name there, the actor there, Evan Peters.
Evan Peters, yeah.
He was in there for what, maybe 10
20
minutes?
minutes?
20
Yeah,
minutes?
15, 20 minutes.
Yeah. He stole
He stole the movie.
Stole the movie.
He ran away with it.
Now, before we get
Yeah.
into, because we're starting to get into the conversation about powers, which I want to dive into.
Yes,
Before we
Henry.
get into that, are there any other defining moments in this film that you guys really liked? Really, we'll get to the ending. The ending we'll talk about last. But are there any other moments in the film that kind of stood out to you that you kind of connected with for any of you guys?
So we can't use the baseball scene, right?
Baseball.
Because
Of
that's
stadium.
yeah.
I
Because
suppose.
that's power. That's power wise, right?
Yeah, you can use that. That's fine. I thought
Oh,
that was
that was another one because the whole segment was the two, like I said, when these guys do some expository dialogue, usually I'd be sitting there like, oh, Jesus Christ, get to the action. But in an X-Men movie, I could just sit there and listen to these guys talk all day long.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the thing
As a-
is that the way they do these X-Men films, it's like dialogue scenes feel like action scenes and action scenes feel like emotionally gripping scenes. I mean, how do you get like that scene in First Class where he's moving the satellite and he's tearing up and you're tearing up alongside of him? That's a power scene and yet you're crying next to him,
Yeah, no, but that's the thing. Like when Magneto's going off on that spiel, you're like, you know what? He's got to. Again, as much as you can decide with Charles, it's like, damn it, the bastard's got a point.
So for me, one of the major things that really kind of stood out to me that I really liked about the film was we're accustomed to seeing a much more sympathetic Eric / Magneto. You see it in the first one. You see it in the second one even more. And then they kind of put that on steroids for First Class when you see him being tortured as a little boy. But this film really, I thought, did a good job of embracing the more crazy psycho side of Magneto that we've seen in the comics. And I was appreciative of that because, if you keep doing the sympathetic, Nazis tortured me thing too much, then it's like, yeah, you get it, but then it just becomes repetitive. And so he went full blown bad guy in this one. Mm-hmm. And I was glad to see that. I mean, not that, because I like Magneto as a character, and he's one of the most well-rounded characters in all of these films, without a doubt. And so I thought it was awesome just seeing him snap and just be like, "Yep, nope, I'm out for myself, and I'm out for mutants, and I'm gonna save everyone, and we're gonna start the war right now."
Yeah, especially because it was. I really didn't think they were going to go that direction, especially because especially in the trailers and all the advertising, the marketing, they constantly are emphasizing the idea that they're going into the past and they have to work together as a team and they have to convince their younger selves to put their differences aside. And so I honestly thought that this was going to end, with this awesome team up between all the X-Men, but in reality, the ending is almost a big divide between the past selves, because it's like, wow, Eric really has just kind of gone off kilter, power hungry kind of dictator at that point. It's like, wow, I really didn't think they were going to go that direction. But I'm like, you know what? It is very much in the spirit of the comics. It's exactly the kind of thing Magneto would have done in his youth. It makes perfect sense. And I'm like, I'm so glad they did it. I mean, it's one of the things I really appreciate about this movie. And it's how brutally honest and true it is to the comic books, and how true it is to the consequences of what happens in this universe. Right. That these characters they understand that their actions have ramifications, and Eric flat out knows that if he does what he's about to do, he's potentially dooming all of mutant kind and dooming the entire planet, really. But he can't see beyond his own prejudice. He can't see beyond his own anger, and it nearly dooms them all. I think that's fantastic, and there's genuine tension, and that's how you feel when you read these comic books. That's why I've always loved the X-Men comic books. There's a genuine emotional attachment you develop during these kinds of moments, and it's telegraphed perfectly in this movie.
I honestly didn't know where the story was going to go and who the real bad guy was, because it was changing hands so many times between Trask and Mystique and Magneto that you're like, I don't know what's going to happen here. But by the end, I actually was surprised with how it turned out. That Mystique was like the cornerstone character for changing the events in a positive way. So she shot the plastic bullet at Eric and shot him in the neck, which was just long enough to knock him down and knock the helmet off for Charles to gain control of him. Yeah. And then she becomes the hero of the film, and I'm like, that's beautiful, because again, that is who her character is. Even when she's doing stuff that is sometimes selfish, sometimes just little things will happen in the story that will tweak how she approaches it, and then she ends up becoming the good guy in some fashion. In this one, she becomes like the real good guy, whether she realizes it or not, because she saves all of mutant kind. I wasn't expecting that to happen. I thought that Eric was going to follow suit, and I thought that they were going to have to fight with Sentinels, and I thought that, like Bolivar Trask, they were going to have to kill him, but it wasn't going to be bad, and it wasn't going to turn out. Because after they had that conversation, where Beast had that conversation with Logan about, I forget what they were talking about.
He's like, do I make it in the future?
Yeah, well, no, not that, but does changing something in a time stream really change anything?
Oh, about like how things are sort of predestined.
How the time stream will correct itself. And I'm like, maybe they still do kill Bolivar Trask, but maybe this time around, they're not as sympathetic towards him because they see that he's bad or something like that. I kind of thought that it was going to go down that way. But
Yeah.
it did not go that way at all. And I thought that was really cool.
But I really like, actually, you just bringing that up, it made me realize something. We have, Wolverine, despite the fact that he is pretty much the star frontrunner of this franchise, he's honestly a bit of a secondary character in this movie.
Yes.
Like, you sort of look at this and you realize, okay, he's the time traveler, he's a very key part of the story, but he's almost secondary in terms of character development and the events that happen. I mean, really, everything that's important is around Charles, Eric, and Mystique. And then there's a couple of characters here and there that have very key players, but those three are still the core characters.
Really, once you get Eric and Charles together, then he kind of just fades into the side a little bit.
Yeah, like he's still there and he's still important and he still has great dialogue with these characters, but it's like we've had at least 5 movies of his development. We don't need any more development with him. It's
No.
like he sort of politely steps to the side and lets other people have their development.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and really, this movie, when you look at it, is Mystique's and Charles Xavier's. When you boil it down.
Yeah, and it does come down to that. They go back to that relationship that they had developed at the beginning of First Class.
And I gotta give credit to Hugh Jackman because we still got. What I liked about his performance was that he still was the quote unquote face of the franchise, but again, he let others shine
Hmm.
with their performances and stuff. But even their take on Wolverine, it was nice that it was a little different than what we're normal, because usually we see him go into his berserker rage, and that's cool and that's great. But
Yeah, usually I've noticed in the more recent installments, Wolverine has become more serious and dark versus, at the beginning of the franchise, he did have a bit more of a sense of humor.
yeah, and they
And-
sort of
and-
went back to that, I think.
Yeah, now he's kind of pulling out more one-liners and he's got a better sense of humor about things.
But I just liked seeing the role reversal. That was one of my favorite things. Whereas, in X1, Professor X basically mentored him and was the guiding force for him. I love the role reversal between the characters and how Hugh Jackman played that. I thought he played that perfectly.
And even he acknowledges, like, I don't do this well. I'm not a patient person. I don't know how to do this.
Yeah.
It's like he's just very honest about it, and it's like it's so like this is I can't help but keep saying that this is exactly the kind of X-Men movie that I've always wanted. Like X-Men First Class came very close to this. X2 was really good at this, but this just feels like I'm reading the comic book. Like, yes, there are details, superficial details that are different and things that are switched around, characters that weren't there or there, whatever. But you know what? It feels like the comics.
Yeah.
It feels genuine to me.
At the end of the day, I think you're right, Karen. They obviously they deviated from the Days of Future Past comic storyline, but at the heart of it, I think, was a very faithful to the spirit of the book, and that's when I go to a comic book movie. That's the most I can ask for. Is it faithful to the spirit of the book?
Yeah.
Yes.
If the answer is yes, then chances
You're
are
never
I'm
going
going
to be exact to the storyline, so just be true to what the spirit of the characters were and what the story was.
When I want the exact storyline, I'll go to 2 things: 1, the comic book, or 2, if there is an animated version, because those tend to be.
And even in the animated version of Days of Future Past, they made changes. They were changes that still worked. Like in the animated version, instead of it being Kitty or Wolverine, it's Bishop, which is honestly the only reason I thought that they included Bishop in this movie, because originally I thought he was going to be the time traveler, but no, of course, Wolverine ended up being the time traveler, which is fine. That's the thing. Any doubts I had about this movie going into it were completely eradicated.
Well, and the way that they explained it was perfectly valid. Well, Wolverine's got healing powers,
Yeah,
so his mind won't react as
I'm glad you brought that up, though,
as
Isaac.
negatively as someone else's might.
I'm glad you brought that up, though, because again, we knew it was we knew monetarily why it was happening, because he's the face of the franchise. But at the very least, the filmmakers gave me an explanation that I'm like, as I'm saying,
believe that.
All right, that makes sense. I'll give you that.
Yeah, that's the thing. They actually took the time to say, okay, the audience is going to know that we're doing this because we need Wolverine to do this because X, Y, and Z reasons. Like the audience isn't stupid, but they gave it a valid reason. They actually went out of their way to say, you know what, we have to make it make sense. We've made past mistakes where this was the exact issue. We overlooked things and we didn't take into consideration how smart the audience is. That they're going to think about this and say, wait, there's no reason for them to do this. Why couldn't it have been somebody else? Yeah. They gave it a reason. That's the smart thing to do.
I liked all the nods. Aside from the at the end when we see a lot of the changes take place, I like the nods to the other films. I thought that was really nice.
Yeah, the flashbacks were well.
Yeah, when you see Stryker in the film and kind of seeing how he's becoming the man that we know him to be, but one of the moments that I thought was really kind of cool was at the end when they fish Wolverine out of the lake or whatever, out of the bay.
Yeah,
wherever the heck that is, I don't know.
Oh, actually, I actually thought about that. That's 2 Marvel movies where we have had our main character thrown into the Potomac River.
Is that what it... Yeah, okay, yeah.
Yeah, because it's in Washington, D.C. He's thrown into the Potomac.
So they fish him out, but when he's on top of that cage, I thought that was a nod to him coming out of the water cage bath or whatever in... whenever he's getting his adamantium.
See, that's the thing. It's like, I sort of assume that timelines... Key details about timelines change, but the events themselves don't inherently change. So he's still brought out of the water, and he's still brought out by, Stryker, but it's really Mystique.
Yeah.
Like, that's sort of the alternate timeline version.
So sort of variations on a theme.
Yeah, exactly.
So now let's move into the action aspect of the film. As the internet meme would say, all the fill in the blank, and in this case, all the powers. we don't, there's really no,
there's no shortage.
There's no way that we can cover all those in a single podcast, but we have everything from Blink's teleportation to
Bishop's energy absorption.
Bishop's energy absorption to the, I think arguably one of my favorite scenes was at the end when Storm and Magneto combine their powers to blow up the X-Jet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And destroy like all those transport ships for the Sentinels.
I love that Storm has a much more active role.
Yes.
Other than creating fog, other than like maybe 1 or 2 lightning bolts,
she's zapping things with lightning.
She does things.
So let's talk about some of our favorite powers. Now, obviously, let's start with what we eventually segued from, because I wanted to get into it at a future point, and that's powers. It's sort of like it was one of our favorite moments, but it also had a lot of powers being used. So I wanted to use that as a segue into this segment. Quicksilver. Agree with Adam. Could not have done that role any better. He, for me, was this is my favorite part of the film. Like, I should say the most enjoyable part of the film. When they break into the Pentagon, just the whole thing. I mean, they come to him and he's basically like, well, what's my incentive for helping you guys out? And Wolverine's like, they basically, I don't know if it was Wolverine or if it was Charles, but like, you get to break into the Pentagon. And he just kind of perks up as if to say, that's payment enough. and oh my gosh, it was so freaking awesome. I mean, I could spend an entire podcast talking about that, but what did you guys like about his powers and his characterization? Let's start with Karen.
Oh, my favorite. The way that they I think there's one scene in particular that we're all sort of thinking about, which is the slow-mo version of him in the current use of his power. There's so it's right after he breaks Magneto out. They're in a kitchen, I guess, in the Pentagon, and they're not quite out yet. And they shoot his entire sequence of using his power in slow motion. So he's moving at regular speed, but everything else is in slow motion because that's how he sees the world.
But even in that, even when everything else is in slow motion, he'll only move in normal motion long enough to position people's arms in a specific way. But when he's moving between people, he's going still at a faster speed. So he's still going at a fast speed within the slowed down time, just to give perspective on how fast he's actually going.
Yeah, and it's the most, because what's the song that he plays? He turns on his headphones.
Oh my gosh! So
I think it's something about time.
The song is called "Time in a Bottle."
There we go.
It's a song by Jim Croce. Oh
Yeah,
my gosh!
Yeah,
No
it's
one
perfect
listens
for
to
the
it,
scene.
and it's
It
hilarious. He's running around the room.
Mwah,
There's
mwah.
like a pot of like soup. There's like soup flying by him, and he sticks his finger out, and then just like tastes it. At this point, the entire audience is engaged, and they're just cracking up laughing.
Mesmerized, yeah.
And
It's
he takes
mesmerizing.
the guns away, and he points their fist towards their face, and he begins the motion.
Yeah.
And
he moves the bullets around, and he like changes where fists are going, and so guys end up punching each other, and it's wonderfully choreographed. It's wonderfully shot. It's ridiculously hilarious. Oh my god! Like I could not ask for anything better. Like,
and especially since
oh my god,
the way that they incentivize it for him is just beautiful, because he basically responds to him like, well, what can you offer me? And you look around the room and you just see all the things that he's clearly stolen.
Mm-hmm.
And their jaws just, kind of semi-drop like, well, I mean, you get to break into the Pentagon. And they get in, and just when they give him, when they leave him, I'm like, no, I wanted to see more.
I know. I was so sad. I'm like, seriously,
definitely.
why isn't he in the rest of this movie? They could have used more of that.
The other things I really liked was the subtle, small hints at the father-son relationship with Magneto.
Yeah.
Potential origins of
Yeah,
this.
it was
My mom said she knew a guy that could do that.
Yeah, it was so perfectly done. And then when he's watching him on TV, and they show the close up on Evan Peters' face, he's sort of like, okay, So I love the way they handled that, and then the scene itself. I mean, what a way to showcase that character. Again, I'm with you guys. When they didn't bring him on the plane, I'm like, come on, I want to see more of this guy. But luckily, the writer Simon Kinberg said he's definitely going to be in X-Men Apocalypse.
Excellent.
So
And now, for those of you that aren't familiar with Evan Peters, go and watch American Horror Story. Is he in all this? Which season is he in so far? Do you watch that show, Karen?
No, it's on my list of television shows to watch.
Wait, what? You're a horror fan? Come on.
I am. No, but okay, until school was finished, I promised myself I wasn't going to get into any new television shows, because it takes too much time. Like, I had to focus on my schoolwork, and plus I had a job, so I'm like, I just don't have time. So now I'm in the process of going through all of them. I just did House of Cards. Now I'm going to move on to Sherlock, and then eventually I'm going to get to that.
Okay, well, he's amazing in that show. I've only seen the first season, and I've started to get into the other seasons, but go and check Evan Peters out.
and you know what's really crazy? He was in Kick-Ass with Aaron Taylor Johnson.
I know, it's amazing when Quicksilver is Quicksilver's best friend.
Wait, who was he?
Oh god,
He was Kick-Ass's best friend.
Yeah, he was Kick-Ass's best friend.
Oh my gosh! I can't.
Inception.
Yeah.
Too much Quicksilver.
Yes. No. I mean, can we Quicksilver movie? Yes, please.
Yes. No, just something with Quicksilver is like a
Yeah, here's my idea. Scrap that stupid numbnuts, what's his name? Channing Tatum as Gambit movie.
Oh god.
And make a Quicksilver movie. Let's just do a
I
swap.
would be against a Gambit movie, just not with fucking Channing Tatum.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean.
You know you're gonna go see it.
I am going to go see it, but I'm certainly not going to pay for it.
Exactly.
I refuse to give my money to a franchise that is willing to do that.
How dare you, sir?
Exactly.
They just set the franchise right again, and now they're going to crap all over it yet again.
Okay, so
Well, let's
clearly, now, I mean, it goes without saying that Magneto's powers are awesome.
Yeah.
I don't want to get into the awesomeness of his powers, because he always gets the best display of powers in all the films.
Well, because he's the villain. It's the only way that we can see the threat. It's the only way that the audience can easily be communicated that this guy has power and he is going to use it.
Yeah,
But
that and the fact that he's got he's got a power that is everywhere, you know? It's not
Yeah, exactly.
like there's really no limitations to what he has. So the second that he breaks out, but still my favorite use of his power scene in any of the films is the one where he pulls the iron out of Officer Lario's blood in X-Men 2.
Yeah.
That was still the best. I love that.
I remember being so scared of that scene when I was younger. I was like, that was
It was
horrifying.
brutal, and he's pulling
Yeah.
iron literally out of his blood. You see all these little blood spots on his shirt, and the guy falls down. He's dead. But it's such a minimalist use of his powers, and yet at the same time, it just shows how unbelievably wicked, horrible he is.
Yeah, it's like this is a fraction of how powerful I am, and yet how devastating it is.
But really, I think the scene in this for him that I liked was when he got all the railroad ties and the railroads picked up, and he intertwined the metal in those in all of the Sentinels that were being shipped to DC, so that he could at that future date control them. Oh, that was
pretty epic.
not the baseball stadium for me. It was that scene with the Sentinels. That was cool. I like that.
No, that was
For
pretty
me,
epic.
For me, I actually what was no, there was another scene. What am I thinking about? Why am I blanking? I can't remember what the other scene is that he shows his powers.
Not when he breaks in to get his helmet.
When he takes all the rebar in the concrete and intertwines it in Wolverine's body.
Basically, that's his methodology for anything now. Just put metal in it.
Yeah. But
Run in doubt, just plug it with metal.
Surprisingly, my second favorite power in this film was not Magneto. It was Blink.
Yeah.
I loved seeing her use her powers. I was really surprised that they got a character that isn't as established as some of these older characters. Blink is a relatively
Relative.
well, you know, relatively newer character in the X-Men.
She was debuted in what, the 90s? I think in the 90s.
Yeah, I think it was something like that. Her power is different from Nightcrawler. She creates portals that can go from one area to the now. In the comic, I'm not sure there's really any limitations as to where she can put the portals. In this one, they kind of limited those powers, but it was really cool because she's transporting all these mutants around, and
even the Sentinels, like
during one of the battles, she uses a Sentinel to use its own powers on another Sentinel to destroy another one. That was awesome.
Yeah,
but the best one was when she uses it with Colossus.
Mm-hmm.
When she creates that portal and he jumps down into it, and then she creates like this portal loop where he goes through a couple of them, and then he's like diving in like a bullet into one of the Sentinels. I was like, this is awesome.
But like, this is it. This is the thing. Like, this is the perfect display of powers, because it's not like The Last Stand where, yes, we had a ton of powers being shown off, but it's by characters that we don't know and we don't care about because they're not characters from the comics. Well, and they're not established as characters in their own movies.
And also, most of the powers used previously in X-Men films furthered the plot as opposed to
just being a display.
Yes. Because I mean, think about it. So like Mystique almost her use of powers in the first two films are almost exclusively revolving around moving the plot forward, breaking into a building or something like, which granted, that's what her power is, but like in this film, she's using her powers the way Mystique does, which is like she's constantly changing. She can speak multiple languages. I don't know. Was that one of her powers?
Well, yeah, but there's like scenes where she uses it to get out of a sticky situation. She uses it to cover her identity when she's traveling. She uses it when she's intimidating someone. She uses it for various different reasons, and some of them are plot related, but some of them are just their casual use of their powers.
Yeah.
And it's that's the thing in the X-Men universe and in the Marvel universe, characters are not. They're not above using their powers for frivolous purposes. And although in this movie, most of the time, they're for very important purposes, it's amazing to see these characters actually display how much power they have. Because I feel like in the previous movies, there was always this kind of restraint in showing that. And it may have been a low special effects budget. It may have been trying to go with the mentality that Xavier wants mutants and humans to be able to coexist, so they don't want them to display their powers all that much.
Yeah.
But now it's like, okay, you're in a life or death situation in the future where you're fighting for for just the ability to live, they're going to use whatever the arsenal they have at their disposal, and they use it.
And the cool thing about the fact that, yes, they're showing the X-Men character, the mutants with all these powers, and they look, they're awe-inspiring and they look so powerful, but at the same time, when they're fighting the Sentinels, they can expend all the power they want. It just drives the point home that it's a hopeless fight. You're gonna lose. This plan had to be enacted. There was no other option.
One of the things I liked about Quicksilver, this was a minor detail, but I'm glad that they addressed it. I mean, granted, there was probably other flaws with power usages in the film, including Quicksilver's, but when he takes Magneto through all those guards, and he puts his hand behind his head. He's like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Basically, I'm preventing whiplash from happening." And
he says it so fast that Eric is like, "What?" He's like,
and then he goes. And like, that's a physics thing, I'm glad they're addressing minor things like that.
And the other thing too was Karen pointed out to it that even though, let's say, in terms of a movie audience, Blink is a new character, Bishop is a new character. The other guy that stood around is his name is escaping me now.
Sunspot?
The guy who was watching for the Sentinels.
Isn't Sunspot Japanese in the comic book?
No, that's Sunfire.
Sunfire, okay.
Gosh,
so many flame guys.
I think they compare.
Sunspot is South American, I believe.
Okay. It looked like they combined Sunspot and Sunfire or whatever his name is.
It just looked like Sunspot to me. I mean, I guess I'm more used to it. I don't know. Sunfire is Sunfire doesn't turn into like an all flame being like Sunspot does. Right. Like Sunfire just sort of has like a trail of fire behind him.
Right. No, but what I was going to say was, Karen, you pointed it out. Whenever we saw a non-essential mutant in any of the other X-Men films, they were pretty much there to be a special effect. Yeah.
It was very inconsequential, and I think the only reason they had those moments in, especially The Last Stand, and it's particularly prominent in The Last.
Yeah, definitely.
It's just an army of mutants that you don't care about, that aren't really associated with the comic books. Very few of them are technically supposed to be representations of characters, but as we found out, there is clearly no connection to those characters. And their powers weren't even related whatsoever. It was really just, okay, we want to show off powers, but we don't.
Look how much money we're spending on visual effects.
Exactly, and I'm just like, I don't care about seeing this mutant's powers because I have no connection to them. I want to see the powers of people I actually care about, and I want to see live or die in these situations.
But the point is, even let's assume that movie-going audiences probably didn't know who these guys were. They're used in such a way where when they're getting killed, you care that they're getting killed.
Yeah, big spoiler alert. That's actually probably one of my favorite parts about this movie is actually not like the Quicksilver scene or any of like a scene in particular, but it's the vicious sort of brutality of consequences in this movie, because it shows how willing the filmmakers are to be true to the comic books. And I keep getting back to this, but it's the core reason why I love this movie so much and why I think it is the best X-Men movie to date. It's because there's clearly a situation where they're setting up that if this timeline does not get changed, especially that they're putting themselves in a very vulnerable situation where they technically cannot stop the Sentinels, and there's no way of reversing this if their plan fails, and people are dying, characters we care about so much dying in such vicious and brutal ways, it knocks it home, and it makes you feel so awful, like awful in the best kind of way. It's like, especially because in the beginning of the movie, it sort of comes out of nowhere, but they're setting up how the whole time travel thing works. But later on in the movie, when it starts happening and you're realizing that there's no reversing this, it really starts to sort of kill you inside. And it's like, oh my, especially with the way that they kill off Colossus.
Yeah, or when he gets ripped apart.
They rip him in half. I'm like, oh God.
But even for me anyway, when they Storm dies, I know that probably something's gonna happen, that she's gonna come back. But even though I knew that, I was like, holy crap, they killed Storm.
that's the thing. It's like there's this initial reaction of, oh my God, if this plan fails, this is sticking, and there's a consequence.
So we get to see the powers in the film quite a bit more in a good way, in a meaningful way, not in a look what I can do kind of way. I agree with what you guys are saying. Let's give a shout out to Peter Dinklage for Bolivar Trask.
Yeah.
This guy's awesome. Really just like hats off to him for this role. He does a really good job of really embracing this psychopath's role. During that scene when he talks about, being fearful of mutants, he's like, oh, I don't fear mutants. I think they're beautiful, and he just starts like describing why he loves mutants so much, and he's truly deranged, and I'm not sure that they've ever described him in that specific way in the comic books. He's just been a person that was a businessman, and a scientist. But in this, it was like he was really crazy, It
was like, it wasn't crazy in a sort of maniacal laugh kind of way. It was a believable kind of crazy where it's like it's almost the same kind of crazy that Magneto is, in the sense that he's almost very clear about what his goals are and what he's trying to achieve, but he almost doesn't see how it affects everything as a whole.
Because if you think, he's basically saying, I'm trying to prevent a war with these people, because if we get into a war with them, we're
going to lose.
Screwed.
Yeah.
So in that respect alone, forget his plan and what he plans to do, but that sentiment alone, anybody can understand.
Mm-hmm.
His methods are ape shit crazy, but his ideal behind it, why you can understand.
Yeah, really just beautifully portrayed.
I'm also glad. One thing I'm really glad about is the fact that there were no jokes. Nothing was made. It wasn't made a big deal about the actor's stature. They just got him because he was the best actor for the job. Yeah. I'm glad they didn't write a scene in there where somebody makes an offhand comment about, his size.
There was no height jokes. None. That was great.
There was no height jokes, but I think that there was one scene in particular where it was a very subtle allusion to his height, but it was done in a very clever way. It's not like lowbrow or insulting. I think I think it's the first meeting we actually have with Trask and the senators. And I think they're talking about how the senators they don't want to fund the Sentinel program, and they're talking about underestimating or overestimating people with genetic mutations. Yeah. And so he sort of says you shouldn't underestimate anyone with a genetic mutation. And, technically his height is a genetic mutation. Right. So I feel like that's it's a very smart and subtle way of doing it, but it's not in your face about it. Yeah. And like you'd only pick up on it if you were really paying attention, I think.
Yeah.
So
now going to start wrapping things up with the movie, to bring it back to what Karen was saying earlier, this movie is about consequences. One of the things that they establish in the film is whether or not their choices can make a difference. Wolverine is being sent into the past because clearly they believe that this is our last hope. You're our last hope. You have to convince me to, convince my former self to do this. Eventually, he's able to communicate with his younger self via Wolverine. And the contrary idea is presented. Maybe there's nothing you can do about the past because the assassination attempt is foiled. They're able to catch Mystique in the act, and Magneto is going after her. But at that point, Bolivar Trask still moves forward, and that is the point at which Magneto's like, nope, we got to kill Mystique. And this was, we talked about this when we reviewed Last Stand, the betrayal of Mystique, right? And how unreal that felt. But this felt real.
Yes, see, that's the difference.
This made sense because of why it was happening.
Right.
In Last Stand, it was like, well, you're no longer of use to me. I bid thee farewell. And that was bullcrap. In this, it was like, you are a danger to my brothers. You got to die.
Exactly.
And that made much more sense.
Definitely.
It was so offhand in Last Stand, and it's just like it felt like they just needed to do that because they wanted Mystique to turn on Eric, and like they needed a reason that she would divulge certain information. It was a plot device that there was nothing more to it.
Yeah.
In this movie, it genuinely felt like Eric was like, you are going to doom us. I can't let that happen. And so he's still acting on the benefit of mutant kind overall, but it's a much more understandable place that he's doing it from.
Yeah. So really the idea is presented that the same thing is still going to happen. Magneto snapped, and he doesn't care what's going to happen. He's going to continue to fight because of the rage that he's filled with because of what's been done to his mutant brothers. And that is his perspective. And so it seems like it's leaning towards Beast's Hank's argument against Logan's, which is maybe there's nothing we can do. And they actually address this at the end of the film. Mystique is actually able to change the timeline. And one of the lines, I believe it's from Logan, is, maybe a single drop can't change the stream, but maybe if you make enough drops, it does make a difference. And so they established.
I think that was Xavier.
Was it Xavier?
Was
Was that who it was?
I was gonna say Logan could be that eloquent.
No, it was Xavier.
So they established the idea that you can make a difference, but it takes a bit more effort and it takes a lot more drops in the
Shall we talk about that?
in the stream. So where the plot is left at, Magneto is stopped. Mystique saves the president, and that is what is put on national news. Bolivar Trask is revealed as a traitor to the U.S. because he's selling U.S. secrets to other countries, military secrets. He's thrown in prison. All of his ideas are trashed. No more Sentinels. And then we're sort of left with a situation similar to what we would see at the beginning of X-Men 1. There's still the conflict, but it's not the same as them saying, well, we're going to build up the Sentinels now. That threat is gone because in the final moments, they switch back and forth really well. And this is hard to do, by the way, in film, switching between scenes, but they switch between future and past so well between both Erics, both Charles, Wolverine, and then, right as you're about to see the Sentinels completely wipe out all the mutants, there's no longer anything there, which means that particular, battle never took place. The Sentinels never existed. So mankind is saved, mutant kind is saved.
So technically, X-Men 1 can still happen because the Sentinels don't exist anymore.
That's exactly why. That's exactly why I said 75% of X-Men 1 is probably still canon.
Now, eventually, we go back to where Wolverine's at, which is at the bottom of the Potomac. That's the Potomac. That's the last scene in the film. Wolverine's mind switches to the altered future, and the Institute for Gifted Youngsters is still alive and very much there. You see Bobby interacting with Rogue. That was really cool seeing her there.
Yeah, they're in a relationship, so
it was brief, Kitty Pryde.
Kitty and Pete are together.
Kitty is yeah, right? That's the way it should be.
Exactly. Like, that's the thing. Like, people don't realize that, like, the whole Bobby... Like, that's... God, I'm so happy that Last Stand is no longer canon.
Okay, so... Now, we're
heaven.
going to geek out here in a second, but let me tell you what I geeked out the most about the altered, the corrected timeline.
Mm-hmm.
I geeked out way more about this. I don't know about you guys.
If you're about to say what I think you're about to say...
I think I know exactly where you're going. But go ahead.
Beast walks by as Kelsey Grammer.
Yeah.
I knew they were going to do
I almost stood
it.
up clapping and cheering. I was like, it's Kelsey Grammer! I had no idea he was in this film. No idea.
I knew because they said that they saw him on set, and so I'm like, okay, there has to be a Beast cameo somewhere in the future. And I thought it was going to be that they were going to show Beast dying, but in reality, they show him in the alternate timeline where the Sentinels don't exist, and he's alive and well. It's like, yay!
He just offers up some, smart aleck comment.
Yeah, he says,
Logan. He's got the classic Kelsey Grammer laugh, and I'm just like,
Small
so then
thing.
Wolverine is trying to find Professor X, And then he sees a long red-haired woman in the doorway of Xavier's office. And of course, at this point, we already know who it is, but it's Jean Grey. Jean Grey was...
She never went through the Phoenix.
Jean Grey was never visited by Botox, Eric Lencher, and Charles Xavier.
Yeah.
That never happened. She clearly... Maybe she doesn't even have the Phoenix Force in this reality. We don't know. But we see her, and he just looks at her, and this was kind of the thing that he had dwelled on. He in his movies in the Wolverine.
Yeah.
You know, there was a lot of regret about what happened there, which actually they took a really crappy part of Last Stand and turned it into something pretty powerful in the Wolverine.
They're like, wow, this movie kind of makes this movie.
And he's just like, it's sort of just like, are you real? You know, type of thing. And he goes up to touch her, and then who stops her? Cyclops. And not only Cyclops,
alive!
but non-emo Cyclops. The leader.
The Cyclops from X-Men 1.
The leader of the X-Men.
Yes. And
Who
he
says,
looks
keep your
like
hands off my girl.
He looks like a leader. Like, I guess that they got James Marsden to come back and do Scott Summers again. But I don't know what it was, but for some reason this time around he looks so much better in the role, and he looks like a leader. Because, like, I mean, in the previous roles, he was always kind of sidelined a little, and he kind of looked like he wasn't fully a leader of the X-Men. This one, I don't know. He's only in it for, like, 10 seconds, but I don't care. He looks like the leader of the X-Men.
He acted like the leader. He immediately grabbed Wolverine's arm, and clearly in this timeline, he knows how powerful Wolverine is, but he grabs him by the arm. He's like, hey, keep your hands off my girl, or whatever.
Yeah, it's like, I don't care what you do, Logan, but you don't touch my girl.
Yeah. And then... beautiful scene, right, between him and Xavier.
Mm-hmm. Because Xavier remembers.
Like, you've got a. I was hoping he would say you got an art class to teach. That would have been awesome if he would have said.
He said history, right?
Yeah, he did. Yeah. He said history, and Wolverine's like, history, and he basically says, I think there's about 50 years worth of history that you're going to have to
fill me in on,
and then the look on Patrick Stewart's face is just like the realization. It's it's you. It's the other you, and that's when he goes into his mind, or he doesn't really go into his mind, but I mean it's explained from Logan's perspective.
Yeah, so what was the last thing you remember?
He gets pulled out of the Potomac, and he starts moving and kind of maybe breathing a little bit like he's alive, and Stryker is there, but then at the last second you see the eyes flash yellow, and that's where the movie ends.
I gotta give the filmmakers credit, because Karen and I knew about Beast being in there, but I had no idea whatsoever. They kept it on the wrap so well that Jean Grey and
James Marsden,
yeah, because James Marsden, that lying bastard, in interviews says, "No, I'm not in it. I'm not in it." I'm like, all right. Well, he said it 4 or 5 times. Stupid me believing,
damn it!
No, but that's good. We live.
I know.
We live in a day and age where there's so many leaks and stuff. I'm glad he lied.
It's a genuinely good surprise.
No, I'm happy that he lied and that I bought the lie, because
exactly. I bought that line.
When J.J. Abrams says so and so's not in this movie, I'm like, yeah, bullshit.
Exactly.
So and so's not going to turn out to be the villain. But
I had heard that there were going to be like 3 main characters that were going to have cameos. I had known that Kelsey Grammer was one of them. I didn't know who the other 2 were. I was like, I couldn't guess. I'm just like, I thought maybe Jean Grey and Scott Summers, especially if they were going to retcon everything, it made sense. But for some reason, I guess hearing the interviews and them saying that they're not in it, it just sort of convinced me. And then seeing it, it's like, it made it. You guys have no idea how much of a joy that last scene.
Oh no, I know exactly how you feel, because
well, I'm not saying you guys, but I'm saying like the listening audience. Like for me personally, it was like an enlightenment moment. The only thing that kind of makes me sad about that revelation is that I guess this also kind of retcons everything that happened in the Wolverine as well, because in the Wolverine he sort of finally overcomes his guilt about Jean Grey. And then he moves on into a relationship with Mariko. But now it's like, oh, so since Jean Grey never died, he never has to live with that guilt. And so he never ends up meeting Mariko.
But because his mind unless that the previous timeline is eventually erased, he has still experienced both timelines.
He's experienced it, but him meeting Mariko and having that relationship with her has technically no longer happened. So it's
well, I mean, but it kind of has to him, though, right?
Yes, to him. I'm not saying that like his memories and his experiences have changed. I'm saying that if he were to go to the
yes.
person of Mariko, she would have no clue who this man is.
That is true. Good point.
But yeah.
So, just ended beautifully, and then the extra credits scene.
Yeah.
I taped it on my iPhone.
Yeah, so Karen,
That's a crime, damn it. No,
Karen, you are definitely big on this. Why don't you describe the scene, since you're much more familiar with the storyline than I am?
Oh dear. Okay, well, so the ending credit scene, which I was with a group of friends, and all of them were like, "No, it's not going to have an end credit scene." I'm like, X-Men is the one who started this. So it starts off with the camera's panning over a desert, and you're hearing in the distance a crowd of people chanting, and they're chanting in Saba Nur, which is, to anyone who knows the comics, it is the original name of the character that becomes Apocalypse.
The birth name, yes.
It is the birth name of Apocalypse. So it pans over, you see a figure standing on a mound, and he is assembling the pyramids in ancient Egypt through basically telekinetic powers, as there's a crowd of people just chanting his name. And then as it turns and pans, so you can get a side profile view of his face, and you can see the blue skin and everything, you see in the distance behind him the 4 horsemen of Apocalypse, and then it cuts out. And it was the greatest moment of my life.
You see him using telekinesis effortlessly.
In ancient Egypt. This is the point we're going to drive home.
Now, a lot of people complain about the appearance, but something to keep in mind, Apocalypse changes his appearance quite a bit over his history. If you read his origin story, I forget the name of the storyline, he looks much thinner. I mean, he looks a bit meatier than this version. But really, the point is that Apocalypse is someone that's constantly modifying himself in appearance and with cybernetic parts. One of his powers is that he is able to integrate with technology, sort of effortlessly. I mean, think of him like Cyborg in
this is
in the DC universe, and so I mean, this is a very young version of the one we recognize from the X-Men cartoons and.
He almost looked very effeminate. Like, at first I thought it was almost a woman because of how effeminate it looked. And I'm like, I honestly didn't mind for a second. I'm just like, oh, that kind of fits.
Yeah.
But, and Saba Nur is basically supposed to be the first mutant in recorded history.
Yeah.
And so this is the first case where someone is displaying this kind of power, and especially having such tremendous power. Like, at this point, Apocalypse is basically just an immortal being.
Yeah.
He's godlike.
And one thing I want to say about what I appreciate about what Bryan Singer does and what 20th Century Fox does with these movies is that they don't dumb down references to the lowest common denominator. And I don't mean that in a degrading way. Most movies, when you're presenting comic book references, you can throw them in there, and they're obviously in all films, and only comic book fans are going to get them. But a lot of like something major like this that's an extra credit scenes, it's usually dumbed down quite a bit. You know,
yes.
Nick Fury coming in saying, "Hi, Hulk, come and join us," you know, or something like that.
Like to start, like, or the Avengers Initiative.
Yeah, I mean, or really arguably the end of Captain America. I mean, that was very straightforward stuff. There weren't really a lot of questions. It's like, oh, okay, well, Sebastian Stan is questioning, his motivations for what he's doing or whatever. But this, unless you have read the comic book, there were people in the audience that were like, huh?
Well,
and I'm appreciative that they aren't dumbing it down, because then it's like, well, what is this? And then they go online and they explore, and then they learn more about Apocalypse's history.
The best part is I had a friend call me as soon as she finished her screening, and she's like, "Just saw X-Men, I really liked it." She's like, "What was that at the end?"
Yeah.
So I had to go into like a
And
half an
Adam's
hour
like,
spiel.
let's talk about it over coffee. So
Yeah, no, I'm like, yeah, this was at like 12:30 at night. I'm like, okay, just call me because I can't do this via text. So then
Yeah. It's a little too much to do over text.
I went through about a half an hour diatribe, and
So,
Yeah.
really, what this movie has done is that it combines the greater action sequences in the other films and combines them with the emotional aspects of X2 and X-Men First Class into this great big gigantic film. I mean, with the Nightcrawler opening scene in X2, you get a similar feeling from the Quicksilver scene. You know what I mean? But you get the same kind of emotions from in this film as you do in X2 and First Class into this amazing film. Do we want to rate it, or do we want to say out of 10, or do we want to just say best?
I'm ready to rate it.
I can rate.
Okay, go ahead, Adam. Let's start with you.
Very simply, best X-Men movie I've ever seen, and 10 out of 10.
Okay, wow.
Wow.
Have you rated anything else at 10 out of 10?
Here's the this
Oh, you said it was tied with Dark Knight, didn't you?
Yeah, and for me to say that being a Batman nut, it means something, and I put it into perspective.
Take note here, Karen. He is a huge Batman nut.
Yeah, I'm sure she's well aware of that by now.
He is familiar with Batman as you are with X-Men. So this is
I have Batman boxers. Let's just put it that way.
Ooh.
I'm not gonna say if I'm wearing that because that's too much information, but let's just leave it at that. The fact of the matter is this: my original screening that I went to was Friday night. I went again Saturday afternoon. That's the first time I watched a movie twice within 24 hours of my first screening.
Wow.
Ever. And that includes the Chris Nolan Batman trilogy, that includes Man of Steel, that includes The Avengers, that includes anything.
That's amazing. I think the only other time I've ever come close to that was Iron Man. After I saw it the first time, I saw it pretty quick after.
So if you have any doubts how much I loved this film, let there be no doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Karen?
Yeah. I don't know if I would give it 10 out of 10, but I totally agree. Best X-Men movie we have had to date. And that is huge considering how good First Class and X2 were. Like those were the pinnacle of the franchise up until now. And I still think this movie kind of blows almost those movies out of the water. It almost shows you like, wow, how not lacking the other movies were, but how they could have done extra things. They could have gone that little extra mile, and the things that this movie has that those ones lacked.
I think the major difference for me was that this movie was better paced. The first two films were just paced it was tedious to get through.
They were very tedious, and they dragged in areas that you kind of were like, oh, I just kind of want to move on to the next sort of thing that is more interesting. Like some of them just kind of drag a little bit too long. But for me, if I can do like decimals, I'll do like 9.75. Then I'll take off like the quarter just for like, I wanted Rogue in there, and for like any minor lines or missteps that are here and there, but they're so few and far between.
So for me, I at this time cannot rate it, and for a couple of reasons. Coming fresh off of a movie, it's tough for me to really give a solid rating to a movie, especially since my favorite movies can kind of fluctuate depending on my mood. Secondly, I went to the film with my wife and my littlest kid, who's about 6 months old. Now, granted, you're going to say, Isaac, you're one of those people that brings your kids. Yes, I am one of those people that brings my kids. However, unlike other people that bring their kids, if our kid is noisy, we take them out. There's no... that
happened in my theater.
There's too many people that they're like, well, I paid X amount of dollars for this film, so I'm going to stay in the theater as long as I can. No, we're not one of those people, but he was up and he was moving around, and it was a little bit of a distraction, I'll admit. And so it made it a little bit more difficult to get into the movie. Some people can kind of like tune things out, but when I watch a movie, I can't have any distractions at all. So what I've got to do is I've got to see it a little bit longer. But I will say this though.
You need to see it again. Yeah.
I will say this. I think my favorite superhero film, comic book based film, was X-Men First Class. I've stated that before on the podcast, and I stand by that to this day. Nothing has changed. This movie to me was on par with it from what I was able to see. Again, I saw the whole film, but again, my kid was kind of like making gurgling noises and stuff like that, and but he was quiet, he was fine. But when a kid is awake, you gotta kind of sort of pay attention to him a little bit.
Yeah.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, just a little. He's your kid. But gosh, man, what an amazing film. I mean, really, for me, going back to what I said before, to me, comic book movies especially are about the moments. For me, the moments in First Class are why I like it so much, where you see him being tortured by Sebastian Shaw, where you see him interacting with Charles, finding that moment of zen or whatever the crap they call it in the film. When he moves the satellite.
The place between chaos and serenity.
Yeah, chaos and serenity or whatever it was. When he moves the satellite. To me, moments are what make movies great in general, but more so with comic book films. And this movie had a number of those scenes.
Yeah.
At the end, when Charles and Eric, their older selves, held hands, that was so poignant.
Now kiss.
I know, I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, you guys have got to make out now.
I know, it's like, oh my god.
Gandalf and Captain Picard. There's
so many different fandoms that come into this franchise.
There were so many good moments in this that that really sucked me in. And I think the reason I'm partial to the X-Men is just because of that, the ongoing struggle, to me, which is, in my opinion, so real to today's society. There's always a struggle going on, and there's always a better way to be chosen, but there are always those that are there to oppose you. And I love that message. So, any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
Go see it.
Yes.
Yeah. The one thing I want to say is, you guys will know that on the show when we were talking about the lead up to this film, I said that I was pretty sure that I called it right then and there that this was going to be my favorite superhero movie of the summer. Well, unless Guardians of the Galaxy pulls a miracle out of its hat, I was bang on saying that, because it blew, for me anyway, Captain America out of the water. And you guys know how much I loved Captain America and how much of a converted Captain America fan I was, because I really don't like the character all that much. But this movie, best superhero movie of the summer, hands down.
I would have to agree. And
Easily.
mainly because I love Captain America, but if you start looking at it from a comic book perspective, Days of Future Past was really a pure comic book film, whereas Captain America was really a political thriller that Hydra happened to be there for, But it was a great film, but it wasn't, to me, like a great comic booky, if that makes any sense to anyone listening.
I think the reason why I consider Days of Future Past an incredibly authentic comic book movie is the fact that they went the extra mile to... They chose a storyline that is so adored and has such a devoted fan base too. This is considered the pinnacle storyline of the X-Men universe. It's pretty much the fan favorite storyline. Again, it's only 2 issues long. It's not a huge storyline, but it's so impactful, and it has left such an impact on its fans that they chose to take on this story and incorporate it into a universe that was already incredibly flawed. And by doing so, they have not only represented the storyline to, I think, the best of the ability that they could possibly manage, and they also corrected any flaws that were currently existing in this franchise. Yeah. To me, it shows that this is exactly what comic book movies should be from now on, is that if you really want to have that fan base who reads those comics and adores them, you have to go that extra mile now. You can't, you can still come up with individual storylines, but I think this movie has just sort of upped the game once again, in the same way that when it started the modern version of comic book movies back in 1999-2000, it's doing it again now.
Yeah. And again, every time we see a great movie like this that's reviewed well by audiences and critics, just goes to show you, comic book movies are not dead, nor do they ever have to be. So
You just got to make good ones.
really,
So-
kudos to Bryan Singer for bringing the franchise back to the.
let's
to
give him
the,
a clap. Yeah.
Yeah, let's just hope that the allegations.
Hope that he's back for the next one.
Yeah, he's the only other one that I can trust at this point. But yeah, just an amazing film. Go and see it. You will love it. It's got the right amount of humor in it. It's not excessive. It has the right amount of action in it. It's not.
Even if you don't read the comics,
Yeah.
go see it. You will probably still really enjoy it.
Yeah.
Yeah. My friend that went to see it has no comprehension of the comic books, so that tells you all you need to know.
So, anyway, go and see it. Excellent film. Karen, always a pleasure to have you here.
I love that this is what everything that I've been doing on this podcast has led up to, and now I'm no longer going to be on the podcast. This is my last appearance, guys.
Well, now that we're done with X-Men films, sorry,
exactly.
Karen, you're out of
Well,
here.
technically, we're not done with them. We still got a couple of commentaries.
And there's always other ways to break down the films.
Or we could start doing the original animated series.
And we could also start doing reviews of major storylines in the comic books. Too.
Yeah, like Days of Future Past, So.
Exactly.
We'll keep Karen around.
Plus, there's more than just X-Men to talk about with Karen.
And plus, Apocalypse is 2 years away, so
So good, I can't wait.
I'm just going to live in the theater in 2000.
On a side note, before we go, can I just say one thing? Please let us see Archangel. Please let us see Archangel.
He needs some. He needs a proper.
It was so funny. I just got to tell this one small story before we end. I come home from that movie and I flip on the TV and guess what was on?
X3.
Last Stand.
I turned it right on to Last Stand. I kid you not. I'm like, this is not a coincidence.
The universe is telling me something.
No, it was hilarious.
This is the universe saying you thought it was over.
And it was the opening scene with what's his name, shaving his back or whatever with the
cutting off the wings. Yeah,
and I'm just looking at it going, you no longer exist in this sucky form.
Can I just say that's another difference between like the brutality in Days of Future Past versus like the grossness and grotesqueness of that movie. Yeah. Like the brutality in Days of Future Past was warranted. This one, it's just like, gross.
Yeah, it was shock value and nothing else.
Exactly.
It was uncomfortable watching that.
Well, this was Bryan Singer and 20th Century Fox middle finger to Brett Ratner, I think. It gives me hope for the Fantastic Four reboot because the writer is the same guy. And the producers are exactly the same, except for Bryan Singer. So I'm kind of more hopeful that, hey, maybe 20th Century Fox finally knows what they're doing with these properties.
And I've also read that the people that they picked for that film, they said it had nothing to do with race or anything like that. They said they picked the people that tested the best.
But you got to understand, those actors are all good actors in their generation group. Like, don't kid yourself.
Yeah. And there's certainly no weak acting amongst them. That's
a talented script. I mean, cast. So if the script is half decent, I think it's in good shape.
So go and see it. Awesome movie.
Definitely. Yeah.
We will. We'll be back with Karen for more. At a minimum, there's
more X-Men, more Marvel.
At a minimum, there's Guardian of the Galaxy coming out this summer.
Oh yeah.
But we'll be talking.
Did you guys talk about Amazing Spider-Man 2?
We have not reviewed that yet.
Reviewed that yet. Would you like to join us for that?
I will have to see it again because I saw it when it came out, so I'll have to rewatch it.
Brush up on it. Tell us what you guys liked about the podcast. Let us know if you have any suggestions about stuff you want us to cover, or maybe a different aspect of the films that we've previously discussed or reviewed or done commentary on that you'd like to hear about. Man, I really just hate ending with the whole super thing because it's just not right. We're talking about X-Men. What do we say?
I don't even know.
Well, you know what you need to do? You just need to play one of the quotes with Xavier at the end of it.
No, there's one. I mean, this would sound. There's one thing that would sound really terrible. It was the line that Xavier had to Wolverine. There's one thing that you said to me a long time ago. Fuck off.
Well, we could end the podcast like that, but we turn off a lot of people.
Exactly.
Well, while we get our X-Men sign off sorted out, just watch the movie and join us next time.
Yep. Take care.
Hi guys.